could kick off today's discussion.
Yes, thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. First of all, a big thanks to you and to your organizations that you're here today. We feel very honored. And as I said in the intro, I love the topic and the theme that we are going to be discussing today. So before we jump into today's topic, I would like to kind of know, and maybe for our community here, tell us about your background and what were you doing before you came into the social entrepreneurship and change side.
Yes, thank you for asking. So I'm Swedish, obviously. Come from a very humble middle class or even lower middle class background from the west coast of Sweden. Studied mathematics and physics at university. Thought that I would become an academic in one of those subjects, but for some reason the business world was also calling me. So I very early went into business, and I have been a serial entrepreneur, starting businesses in IT, property, and in banking. Built a banking business in Scandinavia during the 90s. And during the 90s, all the markets just went up. So it was very easy to make your clients happy. So in the 96, we already had offices in Stockholm, Gothenburg, Malmö, Oslo, and Helsinki. And I moved down with my young family to Geneva to start a similar business there. And then a few years later, sold both my Scandinavian business and the Swiss business to the fourth largest Swiss banking group. Had to commit to remain chairman of the banking group in Scandinavia for some time and be on the board of the Swiss bank for some time. But when that contract ended in 2006, I was just so happy to leave the financial world. And I also almost left the business world and wanted to set up my own foundation, which became the Ekskäret Foundation or the Oak Island Foundation. And I did that wanting to explore the connection between our interpersonal growth and development, our lifelong maturation journey that we are all on, and societal change. And that might seem quite like an abrupt shift. And I think it was, just like when I shifted from academia, and I really like the academic world, and I thrive in the academic world, but then shifting to the business world and having now gone through a similar shift from the business world into the social entrepreneurship world or philanthropic world or whatever you want to call that. And then I could also perhaps mention why I got interested in these aspects of the inner development and societal change. And that was basically because I had the opportunity during my years as an entrepreneur, and especially during my years as chairman of this small banking group, to work with some very talented leadership development consultants who showed myself and my management team the importance of not just lifelong learning. And certainly when we are now living in a very rapidly changing world, some are even talking about the VUCA world, a volatile and ambiguous, complex world, that world puts a lot of strains on us, both cognitively and emotionally. And these leadership development consultants showed us how we actually could build the inner resources necessary to be able to handle the complexities and the stress of our business environment. But then also, to my surprise, I noticed how this had a very positive effect on myself privately and on some of my colleagues. They commented on the same thing. And we really saw the benefit for our business. And then I asked myself the question, how come if we in the business world know the importance of not just lifelong learning, but also lifelong maturation and what some people are referring to a vertical development. And we spend a lot of money on this and we see the benefits of this. How come that we are not at all talking about this in society? In society, we are talking about the lifelong learning aspect, certainly, but not the lifelong inner growth and development. And that got me sort of thinking about bringing these concepts that I learned about in a business context into a bit broader society. And then finally, I also had the opportunity to work with some very talented organizational consultants who showed me and my management team again the importance of corporate culture. And how in a startup or in a larger corporation, it is so important for the top management to be aware of the corporate culture and know that you cannot really create or manage a corporate culture, but you can create the good holding environment for a good corporate culture to emerge. And then asking the same question, if we understand in the business world, understand the importance of corporate culture, why are we not at all talking about societal culture in this respect? And especially if you want to create a multicultural business culture or a multicultural societal culture, then the holding environment and being aware of the difficulties, the challenges, but also the opportunities of giving birth to such a process, how important that is. And then finally, there is a connection between the complexity of the culture that a corporation, a startup, or a society can hold, and the level of maturation of the employees in the organizations or the citizens in a country, if you're talking about a societal culture. So that was really the starting point. And then I've been on a very interesting exploration journey for the last 15 years, resulting in a lot of small startups within this space, social good startups in this space.
But this is really, really very interesting. So I'm just trying to map your journey as you were explaining. So mathematics and physics, and then business world, and then complete turnover to the social or philanthropic side. So that's like, even from mathematics and physics going to the business world is a big change, and then from otherwise. And I was just thinking, how would you put that in a single word? Like, was it boredom, for example? I'm just trying to find a word which defines your switch from business to...
No. The word you are looking for is curiosity.
Curiosity. Okay.
It's curiosity. It's pure curiosity that has been driving me. A curiosity to understand this world that we are living in. And first, I thought that natural science, well, I still think that natural science is a beautiful starting point to try to understand the world. If you do not understand natural science, and this is specifically true in the startup scene, if you are in the tech startup or almost any startup, you have to have an understanding for the natural world. So you need to have a science perspective. But then, of course, moving into business, I very soon realized that the science perspective is a very limited perspective of the world. You certainly need to have it, but it is a limited aspect, and that has to be complemented with a social understanding. I've read a lot of sociology, psychology, developmental psychology, philosophy, and trying to understand those aspects. And I very quickly, even in the banking world, realized that it is much more useful to try to understand the banking world and the market and money from a sociological perspective rather than from a natural science perspective. And of course, traditional economic teaching, even what we teach today at business school, the neoclassical modeling, is essentially an effort to try to model this social phenomenon as the market as a natural phenomenon. And you get some insights, but it's a very limited way of trying to understand what the market and the money and the business world is.
Thank you. I love the word, the focus on curiosity. I think we as human beings are curious creatures. And then when you talked about VUCA and complexity, which is heading our way, I think one part of our nature is being curious, which means that we like challenges as well. And then you brought in the concept of the inner preparedness to
Yeah.
handle challenges and go to the next level development, maturation, as you mentioned. And I think that plays a huge role on how you resolve, digest the complexity, and kind of respond as an
Yes.
individual, and how you kind of build your path. And I think what I really like was that you kind of defined three domains there, that there's the individual, and then there's the cultural aspect of the business, and then there is the societal cultural aspect. So there are three spheres of change which are
Yeah.
constantly moving. The individual is moving at one pace, and then the business
Yeah.
is moving, and then society is moving. So how does this all align? So very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And interact
Yes.
and support each other. And
Hmm.
again, going to the startup world, we know how important it is to be in a local environment that
Hmm.
uh, is conducive to what you are doing. And that is the success from
Hmm.
clusters like Silicon Valley and the Stockholm innovation scene, the Berlin innovation scene, and many other
Hmm.
places, is of course that uh, a startup venture thrives much, much more easily in a culture and in an ecosystem that is conducive to their growth.
Hmm.
And I would argue the same is true for us as individuals,
Hmm. Hmm.
that the environment that we are in could very much either limit our inner development of these capacities and strengths, our inner flourishing, or could be very supportive of that.
Got it. Got it. That's a very interesting point you mentioned about conduciveness of ecosystem or of environment, and then the individuals or startups or business or society's overall progression forward. Um, you've been involved in several geographies, let's say Stockholm, Berlin, you mentioned, and London. What are some of the commonalities or differences you've seen in these from your perspective, of course?
Yeah. So um, I mentioned that I moved to Geneva
Hmm.
in the middle of the 90s. In the middle of the noughts, I moved to London, and I've been mostly living in London since then, but spending more and more time in Stockholm now, and also having a few projects in Berlin. And of course, one comment is that these three cities are very interesting in their own ways, but they are
Hmm.
also very different. Um, I can't escape noticing in London the negative effect that the Brexit has had on the climate generally, business climate and uh, the intellectual discourse and everything. So Brexit has really put a bit of a wet blanket
Hmm. Hmm.
over London. I'm sorry to say, when I moved there some 15, 20 years ago, it
Hmm.
was a thriving cosmopolitan culture, and it drew talents from all over the world. So it was a very, very intellectually stimulating environment, and that is one of the reasons I chose to start perhaps the most, shall we call it, intellectual or academic social venture um, in my small portfolio of
Hmm.
different initiatives called Perspectiva, the Perspectiva Institute in London, where we are really trying to, from a more philosophical or academic perspective, understand this VUCA world that we are moving into,
Hmm.
this world of new technology like artificial intelligence and everything. And we really have the thesis that we believe that we are right now uh, on the threshold of a deep societal transformation
Hmm.
of the same level, at least, as we went through in Europe when we went through the Enlightenment. And we went from a medieval, dogmatic religious worldview and a feudal societal system into a rational, scientific worldview, developing a democratic, industrial society. We believe that we are in the same sort of transformation right now. And navigating that transformation is, of course, a challenge, but also an opportunity, I would say, both for business startups and people working within more the philosophical and the social aspects. I mean, it's these times of rapid change that needs innovation, business innovation and social innovations. And if you get your timing and your ideas right there, then of course you might be able to come from almost nothing and achieve a large market position easily if you do it right, compared to in a more stable industrial or societal environment where the big operators have a big competitive advantage. So, but in order to do that, in order to position yourself, my advice to any startup would be that, yes, you need to know your natural science, you need to know the business that you are in, but you also need to have a view of the bigger picture. And that bigger picture does not just include what's going on in your specific industry or field of technology or innovation, but do also look out for the big societal shifts. So do have this broader radar on, because that will help you to navigate what is going on. And if you're interested in this biggest and broadest picture, yes, go to Perspectiva's website, and that could be one point for a radar screen. Another point that I also want to plug, if I may, which is not as academic and perhaps difficult. Perspectiva could be a bit difficult, should be, because it should be on the leading edge, is the Emerge website with the URL whatisemerging.com. That is another initiative in the ecosystem that, in a little bit more popular terms, keeps a radar screen up on both technological developments and social developments and ideological developments and things.
Very interesting. I love the depth of the talk. Thank you so much, Thomas, for taking it there. But I think you mentioned something. I'll just summarize it for our community, kind of.
And I didn't answer your question, so but first do the summary first, and then I will answer your question.
But I love the way you picked up the ecosystem comparison, and you kind of honed in on one topic, which was Brexit, and you referred to it as a wet blanket. I completely share the same feeling, because as human beings, we grow when we open. So we open hand gestures, open mindset. I think that's where we grow, that's where we connect. So when we recluse, when we kind of recluse ourselves into ourselves, it becomes very difficult to kind of connect. We are connection species. So that's how we are relationships-based species. So it's very important for us. So I think when structural shifts in a society or an ecosystem kind of closes it down, it becomes very difficult. So maybe there's a lot of stress and all those things. And then, of course, places become quiet, ecosystems become quiet. It's much difficult to achieve collaboration. So I think I really resonate your point of the Brexit over there. And then I think you mentioned something very interesting. Last week, we had Nordic Startup Festival where Magnus Grimland joined in from Antler's headquarters. And he talked about this AI shift as a platform shift. And he said that it happens every 2-3 decades. But I think your point of this being a much more deeper and fundamental shift from medieval to where you said that the society, it's the same level of going from those times to the modern democracy and rational thinking. So I completely align here as well.
And of course, they are interlinked.
Yeah.
Because it's the technological shifts that enable or even demands the societal shifts. So just like, for example, the printing press and the printing technology was fueling the transition from the medieval to the modern society, in the same way, both internet and artificial intelligence and other technological developments are the ones that is driving or even making it possible, but also making it necessary for us to take the next level in societal transformation. And of course, all businesses are operating in a societal context. And if we are missing the societal context and concentrating too much on just our business case, and especially in times of rapid societal change, then even the brightest business idea might get lost because of the shifting context. Some a firm advice to any startup listener or even startup investor listening would be to, yes, keep a firm focus on what you are doing and the technology, but also watch out for the shifts in context, because if you can't read your environment and the rapid shift there, you might be lost with your business case.
Got it. I think completely agreed over there. I think what I don't know if we continue on that path for a couple of minutes. What from my perspective, what I see is that the only difference in the change that is heading our way, as it has been heading our way previously, the change has been incremental and slow, but the pace is now accelerating.
Yes.
And our minds are still trained as processing machines. So we witness something, we learn, digest, respond. So it's a process. So our capacity to react, respond, adapt, maybe it's still not there to the level of to the velocity of change that is currently happening.
No. But then the good news in this is that, again, referring back to my experience from leadership development programs that I participated in, we have the opportunity to develop more our capacities to handle this more uncertain world, more rapidly moving world. And then I would want to refer to another initiative in our ecosystem, and that is the Inner Development Goals initiative.
Okay.
That is really providing a framework to understand what sort of inner capacities that we can and that we need to develop in order for us to become able to handle this rapid shift, not the least in our business environment, but also this helps us in our private lives, and it helps us to better also understand the shifts in society and to become active citizens in this societal shift that, again, I believe that we are in right now. So that's the Inner Development Goals, the IDGs we need to develop in order for us to thrive as individuals, as business, as society, but also for the planet.
Okay. I think completely aligned. If we already have a question on the website, so we'll be sharing that in the post email as well, but I'll locate them while we are talking and try to share them here as well. But I think there seems to be interest in our community on the inner development goals. If we can kind of stop on that point and kind of go into the rationale for it and what is the way individuals can access this system or mindset. Yeah.
So yes, you will share, I presume, in the show notes or in the email the websites, but the www.innerdevelopmentgoals.org is a good starting point if you want to explore this universe. And we also have a big live event in Stockholm coming up in a month's time called the IDG Summit, where we expect to gather 2,000 people physically in Stockholm and a lot more online around exactly this. How can we help ourselves and each other to develop these inner capacities? And we are in this framework, we are targeting 23 specific capacities that science have shown that you can develop and that you need to develop. And we divide them into 5 dimensions. The first dimension being being. It's about yourself. It's about being grounded, being present, knowing your values, finding your inner compass. Then the next dimension is about thinking. That could be things like complexity thinking, systems thinking, your ability to take and seek more perspectives on issues, but not the least sense making in a rapidly changing world. And then the next dimension is about relating. How can we deepen our relationships with each other, to society, to the planet? That, of course, compassion and empathy is an important skill. Then we have collaborating. How can we be better at collaborating? And then finally, the last dimension there is acting. So how can we put these resources and inner skills and capacity into the service of myself, my family, my organization, my society, but eventually also, hopefully, for humanity.
Very good. I just put the dates here for our community, so you guys can check them out. And the summit is happening on 11th and 12th October. So I think this is thank you, Tomas, for sharing that.
And it's in real life in Stockholm, but also digitally accessible from all over the world.
Okay, great. Let's rewind a little bit, because you talked about perspective, you talked about what is emerging, you talked about in development. How is it all related? If we go back to the organization with Ekskäret, so how in your journey in social entrepreneurship, how did you kind of put all this together?
Let me just before I answer that, go back and just spend the 2 or 3 sentences on completing my answer on your question, where of the differences between London, Stockholm, and Berlin, where I derailed, and I won't spend lots of time on that. But then just commenting on Stockholm. Stockholm and Sweden is a very interesting environment. I think it's the most innovative environment, business innovative environment in the world's in tech industry, second only to Silicon Valley. I don't know if that's true any longer. I think a lot of things are going on in China as well, but it might be more spread out in China. So if you're looking at a specific city, Stockholm is definitely interesting. There are lots of new ideas coming up in not just Stockholm, but in Scandinavia generally. And it's a good base to test ideas, not least social ideas. But the downside is, of course, that all the Scandinavian countries are relatively small countries. So London has a population of 10 million. That's the population of the whole of Sweden. So the Scandinavian countries are small, and that is why I'm also interested in spending a lot of time in Berlin, in Germany, because I believe in the geopolitical situation that we are in right now. With the problems we mentioned, the problems in the UK, but of course, we have big problems in the US. And even though the tech industry and the commerce in the US is flourishing like never before, the societal context there is at some sort of breaking point. So from that perspective, it's a little bit difficult for us to rely on the US as being the anchor of the world order. And of course, that opens the possibility for China to step in, which China is trying to do. But I'm hoping that Europe could be a third alternative there. And again, a lot of thinking and inspiration can come from Scandinavia, but nothing will happen in Europe if Germany and France do not move. And Germany is generally quite a conservative society, but Berlin is a very dynamic and open society. And it's interesting both for the tech scene in Berlin, but also for the social scene and the thinking that is going on there. So for me, it's important to connect these, not to give up on the Anglo-Saxon world, the sort of London, Silicon Valley connection. That is one part. It's important to be there. Then Stockholm, and then the more continental Europe, and see the dynamics amongst this. Not forgetting, of course, to keep an eye on what's going on in China and following that closely as well.
I think you're absolutely right. We actually, I saw something. I think Hemant, who is a venture capitalist, he put something that even in that new emerging AI scenario, there's going to be power blocks. Like, of course, US is one power block. Of course, US is very commercial and corporate driven, as you say, and then the societal part is kind of not up there in the US side. But I think my point over there was that we seem to have like 3 or 4 different axes right now. Axis one, of course, is US, as you say, that it's corporate, it's commercialism, commerce is flourishing, and all that. Then we go to China, where state and the we come into issues of ownership of technologies and how it's used and how it's used by state. But when we move to Europe, I think we seem to be very strong on consumer or user rights, which will shape the technology in a very different way. So we'll be, I, for example, think that we'll be probably the most regulated market when it comes to adoption of AI and how it goes. And then, of course, Antonella, you mentioned here about Africa. So the emerging markets represent probably a place where most of these technologies will eventually be deployed, because with low penetration levels, these technologies will go there, but with huge differences in compensation structure for the workforce. Suddenly, when an emerging market is automated, what happens to that market on the people level? So there's a lot of
absolutely. And if we're looking for market and market segments, we should certainly not forget Africa. We have areas in Africa that is growing more rapidly, not just population-wise, but also GDP-wise. So I mean, Africa is opening up as a market. We do not yet see the level of innovation in Africa that could compete with the US or with Europe or with some actors in the Far East, including China, of course, but not limited to China. We should nor forget about India, Pakistan, huge markets that are coming online, and India might be the next China when it comes to production, but also a huge upcoming market for goods and services. And we might see India develop into an important innovation hub. We might.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Right. So we are living in a very interesting world, and on top of this, the geopolitical game that we must somehow try to understand, and we are operating within that. And then at the same time, we have the war of aggression going on in Europe. We don't know where that is taking us in different respects. And we are living in a climate and social crisis that we haven't seen we haven't seen this. We haven't been in a climate crisis like this ever before, of course. But I would also argue that we never been in such a social crisis and a crisis in democracy that we see right now. We haven't seen for well, not since we had fascism dominating Europe some 70 or 80 years ago.
But that's also something like there's so many interesting points coming out over here. I think one of the main things with human beings is that we forget, because we live over a particular period of time, and then the next generation comes over, and then it's a reset. It's a minor reset on generation to generation basis. So we have a memory that becomes part of textbooks and some narratives, and we very quickly forget that, and suddenly there is a new wave of change that hits us negativity. So I still believe there is sometimes crisis is a great point of unity. Which means and sometimes we need to experience the crisis to see how united can we be. For example, when a crisis on a magnitude of COVID hits, suddenly there is a huge response to the crisis, because the crisis is very immediate. It can be felt at an individual level, but maybe climate crisis is hugely bigger, but it's not felt at a person level. I think that might be an issue why we are unable to kind of develop unified approach of narrative action around climate.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And again, coming from natural science and business, I didn't used to be that interested in history, but I think that this is one message again to everyone that is an entrepreneur, that the time that we are going through right now, in order to understand that, we need to be able to put ourselves in a historical context. And the genre of big history, the Yuval Harari perspective of the world, looking at human history in a very, very broad perspective, can help us actually understand what we are going through right now. Because again, the changes that we are facing now, to understand that, we need at least to go back to the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution and see how that affected society. But it might even be that we need to go even further back in history to understand what's going on today.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I didn't answer. Sorry, I didn't answer your question. I went back there. So you asked about the ecosystem, and I will just answer that briefly as well. So for most of the initiatives that I have been part of, starting for since the 15 years ago when I left banking, has been around this connection in the development, supporting in the development, but not just for the benefit of the individual, but also for the benefit of society, and trying to understand this big shift in society. So you can say that the different initiatives are targeting different market segments within this space. Some of them are the sort of the very early on, with a very small target group of the sort of innovators in this space, and that could be like Perspectiva. Then you have the early adopters, the ones that are starting to see these shifts going on, being interested in this, trying to understand that. Those early adopters, they could go to an Emerge gathering, or to what is emerging.com or something, and meet other people in that space. And then we have the early majority, and that's more the target group for initiatives like the Inner Development Goals, or our non-profit open source digital platform that my foundation has been developing together with the Norrsken Foundation in Stockholm. And Norrsken Foundation is, of course, a very interesting foundation in this space when it comes to tech for the societal good. So that's something I think you should also put in the show notes. Norrsken Foundation, that was founded by the tech entrepreneur Niklas Adalbert. So that's the platform for non-profit platform for digital support of inner growth and development, called 29K, or Aware. So if you're interested in that, you can search for the Aware app. And then initiatives like Conscious Co-Living or Conscious Co-Working Space is more also directed to the early adopters, perhaps early majority segments. So it's a bit, different language, different approaches to the different, both geographically, but also in terms of maturity of the audience.
But you mentioned, thank you so much. So I put some of these websites here. I'd like to kind of stop for a moment over 29K. If we can go a little bit there, because I've been seeing from the entrepreneur side, Norrsken also backing that. Is Norrsken an investor? What's Norrsken's role, or how is that structured, 29K? Is
no, 29K, yeah. So 29K is a social initiative. It's run by a foundation called 29K Foundation, and it was founded by the Ekskäret Foundation, the Norrsken Foundation, and the social entrepreneur Erik Fernholm. So the three of us got together and said, we want to do something here, non-profit. And why did we choose non-profit?
Mhm.
Well, there I think it's important to understand that the market and the startup scene is a super strong vehicle for making many things happening. But some of the most important things in the world are what economists calls collective goods.
Okay.
And the standard example there is our military defense, for example. Okay, you can't privatize that because either you have a common military defense and then everyone will be protected, or you will not have it. Another example of a common good is trust in a society. And we would argue that a common good is also the level of awareness and consciousness in a society. Because you need a certain level of awareness and consciousness in the general population in order to be able, as we started this pod by saying, supporting a more complex, more inclusive societal culture. So the more complex society becomes, both technologically, but also socially more complex, then we need a larger awareness in the general population. And the 29K is an effort to make personal development and the possibility to develop one's own awareness and the capacities to be able to operate successfully in a VUCA world, to make that available on large scale and really use the dynamics of zero-sum, marginal zero-sum cost dynamics to be able to bring this not just to thousands of people, but to millions of people in a cost-efficient way. So that was the idea. And again, Norrsken and Niklas has been the major financial supporter of this venue from the very venture from the very start.
Thank you. We are heading to the end of the talk, and I was thinking if we could collectively sum up your experience of moving from the business side to the social entrepreneurship side and kind of give out a message to the entrepreneurs who are building social ventures, impact ventures. Like, what have been your, how would you say, high points and low points, where you think that you have struggled over these years, and when entrepreneurs are building these new social initiatives, what they need to be watchful of, like what is required to become a successful social entrepreneur and kind of drive the change at the level that you are dreaming?
I would say timing, first of all. Get your timing right. Timing is everything in this space. If you are too early, it will not work.
Okay.
If you're too late, you are too late. So you need to time this with your specific segment. And that ties into the second thing. And we already touched on that, and that is to read the market or read the context, read society. So what is going on? Probably you have some idea of some technology or something at the bottom. Of course, you know about that. You have to know about that 100%. But then you are operating in a larger technological context, but also societal context, but not just societal context. If you are a social entrepreneur, it's also an ideological, an idea world. So where our worldview and the world of ideas. And you have to somehow be in contact with this larger thing to get the timing and your segmentation right. I mean, this is true for any entrepreneur, but if you're doing social thing, you need to be even broader in that, to read what some people call the zeitgeist. That's a word from Hegel. You know, the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist. And then the third aspect is financial. If you're doing a straight business venture, then that is fairly obvious how you do that, and that is difficult enough. But in a more social space, it becomes even more difficult because some of the most needed innovations in the social space are per definition social, and becomes public goods. And when you are trying, and the public goods again are some of the most needed goods in the world, but it is not possible to finance that development through, or very difficult to finance that through market returns. And it is a mistake to believe that every social venture could be packaged as an impact investment case. Some can, absolutely, and those that can be packaged like that should be packaged like that. But then there is a huge part of goods that the world needs that cannot be packaged that way, and will even be damaged if you try to pack it as an impact investment. And then you need to go for more traditional philanthropic or state funding or communal funding or something like that. And that space is very difficult to operate right now, especially since impact investment is crowding out some of the available funding for those projects that need philanthropic or societal funding. And it's important to remember that they need this, not because they have any insufficiencies in any way. It might just be that the character of what is being offered to the world is such that you can't fund it through the market.
Very good point. I'm just summarizing here. Like you talked about timing and the intertwining of timing and the segmentation. So I think that's spot on. Then you mentioned a very important word, zeitgeist, which is the spirit of times, and you related to reading the kind of context of your dream, the context of the market you are operating, the kind of change environment that you are heading into and what you want to change. So I think that's the second part. And third is you mentioned about the financial side, and that's where you broke it down in two areas. One is impact or impact tech, which is becoming
three.
Okay.
The traditional just plain startup. Then you have the plain startup, just go for the market returns, get the investors in, build a unicorn. Okay, that's simple. Relatively simple. Then you have the impact part, where you for it to be true impact, you have to ask the investors to give up some returns for a greater good. Okay, so that's the impact. And then you have the third part where you cannot, which are projects because of the character of what you are offering. Say that you have find a way to build trust in society or in a group or something. It's very difficult to go out and try to charge trust for micropayments. And if you try to build trust with a model where you are relying on advertisement revenues, that won't work either. So then you need other funding that understands the value of what you are trying to build, but also understands that it will not be possible to build this through financial returns.
You're absolutely right. And if you try to bend it too much on the other side, just to bend it, it won't work. So and I think that's also a question of human nature, because as entrepreneurs, of course, we are humans, and we are building under a set constraint of finances, times, our own stage of life. So I don't know. I sense that the difficulty on the third leg that we are talking about maybe makes the other two legs more, how would you say, greener for the entrepreneurs, that the kind of this is much more difficult to address. So this might need a completely different mindset or individual character to build
and of
something.
Course, exactly. And of course, after spending 20 years in the banking world, I certainly understand the power of the market. But there is also generally in our society an over-belief in, an over-reliance on the market, believing that the market can fix everything. And that is sadly not the case. And that is not because I'm a socialist, it's because I'm a banker and I know how the market works.
Got it. Tomas, this has been such an interesting treasure trove of a talk.
Thank you.
Like, I really appreciate the openness, the level of depth that we had today in today's discussion, and I absolutely loved the community who joined us today, and some of them will be listening to it afterwards. So a big thanks to you for taking the time out and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you. It
Thank
was
you
a
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.